I believe that we've got to start. We have to move. This is almost a time where we've got to really energize and mobilize for organizing all workers and fight back against this corporatization of virtually everything in our culture.
So we'll try a little different take on your analogy.
Okay.
I mean, I think it's more akin to asking one player to play without shoes. I mean, it's a built-in disadvantage that clearly is going to have some impact at the end, a limitation. The fundamental problem with right-to-work statutes is that they're anti-democratic. I'll give you another illustration.
Small d.
Yeah. I mean, we live in a democratic society, and we vote for and elect politicians, and we don't always succeed in electing the people. I mean, I'm not real happy with Michelle Bachmann. I didn't vote for her, but she's going to be my representative until the next election. Doesn't mean I can't pay taxes while she's in office. I mean, I'd like to. I'd like to be able to say, well, I didn't vote for her. That's exactly what right to work does. It says, well, if I don't like the union it's in, I shouldn't have to pay taxes. They still have to represent me, though.
In fact, that was my next question I was going to go to. Bernie, you deal with contracts on a daily basis. Under current law, do unions represent all workers in a bargaining union, whether they belong to the union or whether they do not?
Yeah, I mean, we're required under the law to represent workers, and that are covered under, usually when you do a contract, it defines who's part of your bargaining unit. With right to work, you have to represent everybody, even if they don't pay dues. And in fact, if you do a poor job of representing them, they have the ability to go after you either through the process of filing a charge with the National Labor Relations Board, or to actually go after you in a court for damages in that. And you have to represent everybody, but the whole issue of fairness of, paying your way or paying your fair share is thrown out the window. And here's another thing that is escaped in a number, or is not brought up in these conversations. When you bargain a contract, you do not automatically get this agreement where dues are deducted, dues deduction. It's something you bargain for. And we actually have some agreements where we don't have that in place, and we collect dues every month. People, send a check in, or we have a steward that will collect the dues for a shop and do that. It's not real common. Some would argue that, gee, maybe that's the way it should be, but given hours and given the size of some bargaining units, it's not realistic.
Well, I think Bernie's absolutely right. There's nothing in the law that requires employers to agree to a union security provision. They do it voluntarily in collective bargaining.
Part of the negotiations process.
So I mean, if you change the law, all you would do is take that issue off the table.
So going back to Bernie's earlier point of several minutes ago, that's really getting government involved in a private process.
Indeed it is. It interferes with the bargaining process.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Let's go back to another idea. Who contributes to this economy? The workers making good money, a living wage. Do they help the economy? What effect do workers have on Main Street, on Main Street hometown businesses?
Well, the bulk of the workers we represent work in retail, and retail is one of the most poorly paid sectors in our economy. If you're not fortunate enough to have a union contract or to work in an organized setting, you will make substantially less in wages. I'm always proud of the fact that if you work in a grocery store in the Twin Cities, chances are it's going to be an organized store, and your standard of living is significantly higher than folks that don't have that. And our members are able to have affordable health care, pensions, a wage that they can actually buy a house with, cars. I have a number of members that are able to actually live in the communities they work in, and we're very proud of that. And that's what we're about. We're about we're not just about every 4 years getting people plugged into political races and that. We're about lifting up and creating middle class.
Creating the middle class. People are pouring money into the economy. They're going to their local Cub or Rainbow or other union grocery store. They're buying something at the local liquor store or whatever. Buying a car at the local car dealer. They're pouring money because they have a living wage, because they're making money. They're helping to have a circular flow of money. So,
And they pay taxes.
and they pay taxes. And they pay taxes. Yes, and they contribute to retirement plans quite often. So if this balance between corporate CEOs and workers is disrupted, through a right to work law, so they're not at the table, hammering out a collective bargaining agreement. We'll say the company is prospering in good times, and there are profits. So, who is going to receive a greater share of those corporate profits? The corporate CEO or the workers who are spending that money out on Main Street?
Well, that problem is already out of balance, Dan. I mean, the disparity between CEO pay and worker pay has been well documented, and we're, as a society, are way out of whack with the rest of the world on that. The problem, it's simply in terms of the local economy, is you only have so much disposable income as a worker. Middle class people, can only spend and buy certain kinds of things. Well, a CEO, that additional income, he's still not going to buy any more cars. Maybe he might buy an extra one. Yeah. He's not going to buy any more groceries. He's not going to turn that back into sales tax revenue. With the philosophy that we've had in Minnesota, that the wealthy should be taxed less, which has been around since Jesse Ventura cut taxes back. That money simply goes into profits.
So let's turn now, look at the issue of safety that we touched upon just briefly. That if number of workers are reduced by an employer because they want to preserve or enhance their bottom line. Say, gee, if I can cut off a couple workers here or a person there, I'll make money. I'll maximize profits.
Or I'll just get more out of my existing workers, so I don't have to pay additional benefit costs, which means we end up with a lot of forced overtime and people working longer hours.
Yes, and forced overtime. I can recall my father having forced overtime a great deal during some boom times. And
well, there's a lot of it going on today.
Other workers are not being hired.
Exactly.
They're squeezing more and more. That leads to accidents.
It does.
It does. I mean, there are fewer people. They're working longer. They're tired. Accidents happen when people are tired. Have you seen anything on the accident or worker death rate in right to work states versus a state like Minnesota that does not?
Well, what I do know is Minnesota and Wisconsin are 8th and 9th, respectively, when it comes to safest states. Mm-hmm. And the state with the most accidents, the highest accident rates or most unsafe is Wyoming. And
a right to work state.
A right to work state. So
the home of Vice President Dick Cheney.
I think
former Vice President Dick Cheney.
And I'm sure there is data available with accidents per thousands, per 1,000 workers, and we could chart that out. What I'm afraid of is this is a thing that's creates a culture of deregulation, of not funding, defunding. The OSHA is taken out of the general fund in this state. It's not dedicated, and I'm very concerned that that will be on the chopping block, along with, as I said, this buffet of anti-worker stuff that's being displayed.
I'm thinking back to 2010 now with our nurses in Minnesota as they were going through a very public and very contentious collective bargaining process that eventually was resolved through agreements. But one of their big points was patient ratio. You know, how many patients does a nurse take care of in certain you know in the cardiac unit, for example, or in the emergency room? You know, how many nurses should be there? With more nurses present, you know, people's lives were safer. You know, the safety issue is a big deal, and it would be true of a fire department, a police department, bridge inspectors, I-35 bridge. You know, the safety is a real concern. You know, we're not just talking dollars and cents of wages and benefits. Although I don't apologize for being a proponent of money for workers, but there's more involved, and safety is a real concern.
Well, safety is an issue that's in some ways kind of independent of right to work. I mean, you can look at the data, and as Bernie suggested, the so-called right to work states have much worse safety records than do the non-right to work states like Minnesota. The problem is it's probably not what right to work that's causing it. It's the fact that there is less regulation in the state. Minnesota has its own state OSHA law. Many states do, because the national law permits any state to pass a more restrictive or more protective law than the national law. Right to work states don't have little state OSHA acts at all. So they're solely under the national statute, which is not as strong as the Minnesota statute, for example.
It's part of a total culture.
It is.
Part of a total culture. Governor Tim Pawlenty left Minnesota after 8 years of neglect and
I wish he'd left Minnesota.
Yeah, well, he left a long time ago.
He keeps hanging around, yeah.
But he had a total lack of vision for the state. In a minute or so, could you just say, you know, what can we do? You know, as Paul Wellstone said, you know, we all do better when we all do better. How can we all do better in Minnesota?
Well, I'm not sure that, you know, you mentioned our former governor, and I think, you know, a lot of his philosophy and vision was being driven by his presidential ambitions.
Yeah.
And he moved dramatically to the right in the second, his second administration. I mean, you know, he used to run, his father was a worker, his brother's a welder. I mean, he came out of a working class environment, working class family. He kind of forgot that and sort of aspired to be the darling of the extreme right wing. That led to, I think, a little disinterest in what was going on in Minnesota, and really a vision that said, well, we're just going to let things ride, and we want to be hands off, and really did a minimal job of governing.
Yeah. So what we really need are good working conditions, good wages, to grow our middle class, and to restore the balance, you know, between the CEOs. I mean, it's not a 50-50 balance, but to close that gap that has gone greatly. But our award-winning director, Roger Carlson, is starting to scream in my ear that we just have a few seconds. So I want to thank Roger and our whole crew, Ed Rapp, Larry Chadwick, Mary Benner, our guests, certainly Professor John Remington and Bernie Hesse, for your perspectives on a very contentious issue. And we've only just begun to explore some of the ramifications. So, working men and women continue to need to be informed about all labor issues before the legislature, and especially the one mistakenly called right to work.